Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The British prospect Joyce has linked up with Adam Booth as his new trainer. He will be his third trainer in 18 months. Joyce only turned pro October 2017. He is now with his third trainer and relocating back to the United Kingdom after spending less than a year based in the United States under Abel Sanchez. His first trainer was Ismail Salas. So I'm going to get to some of this, unpick some of this, because there's actually a few things going on here, and it's not just something I want to talk about Adam Booth and the style and what he can do for Joyce, because I think this is more career-based in terms of the ambitions fighting in the UK. I actually believe Joyce's manager when he said on social media, there's always going to be people saying there's been a fallout. I can absolutely assure everyone there's been no fallout at all with Abel Sanchez, but at this stage of Joe's career, we can't afford to make any mistakes, and we feel Adam Booth is exactly what Joe needs. So that's a little bit of a backhanded compliment, because he says we can't afford to make any mistakes. So what does that mean? That Sanchez was making mistakes on Joyce's behalf or through the training? But Adam Booth, I'll quickly touch on this. It's an interesting sort of choice of trainer, much as Sanchez was, because Adam Booth is a very offensive-minded trainer. He will whip his fighters into fantastic shape. And when I think of the Booth sort of style, I think of guys like David Haye when he was with Booth all those years ago, and guys like George Groves. And the sort of style is, from the outside, explosive, using and relying on athleticism to get some of your work done. So it's not exactly something that when I thought of Joyce that I thought it's a natural fit. Although Joyce himself is clearly an athlete, he is built like anything, but I just don't know if his style will necessarily gel with Adam Booth. So it'll be interesting to see from a stylistic point of view, what can he actually do with Joyce? What is he going to tweak and change here? Because I think we've seen Joyce has been getting better as a professional since he turned pro about 18 months ago. He was making some good strides under Ismail Salas. Salas was working with Joyce for the best part of a year or so. Then mid-2018, that was the last fight under Salas. And the next one was the Iago Kaladze fight. And that was in, September 2018. That was the first fight under Sanchez. They announced that he was going to be training under Sanchez in the July. And then he subsequently had the Joe Hanks fight December 1st on the Wilder undercard. And then there was Berman-Stavern about a month or so ago. That was where he won this WBA gold title, which has somehow placed him above the WBA heavyweight rankings. He is now rated as a champion by the WBA. So you could kind of make a bit of a joke here. Joyce is going through trainers like the WBA is going through its champions with the number of belts that it's handing out here. But you have to ask yourself why. What's the sort of motivation behind this latest move? And I think some of it is Joyce is 33 years old. Maybe he wasn't quite getting what he was wanting, his management for him back in the America, not necessarily under Sanchez, but just the sort of fights that he was wanting to be in to progress his career at a rate that they would be happy with. Because he is 33, turned pro late, and Kaladze and Joe Hanks as the American-based fights, and even Berman-Stavern, disappointing fights. We would have hoped for better for Joyce. Although if he was a regular prospect, someone who was in his mid-20s being brought along at a certain pace, I actually think his record would be quite strong compared to a normal prospect. He's got, there is some name recognition with some of these guys who are solid gatekeepers or regular journeymen who do the sort of rounds here. Berman-Stavern, obviously a former WBC champion, that's, some good name recognition on the CV, although that was a 6-round beating. Joe Hanks, usually pretty tough and durable, he was taken out in a round. So we know Joyce has got something there. He hits like a mule. But under Sanchez, one thing that I had noted, and that was the last few fights, he'd been going up in weight. He was a career heaviest, 265 pounds for his last fight. When he left Ismail Salas, he was 251 pounds. So for whatever reason under Sanchez, he's been bulking up. And I had wondered, well, is that going to catch up with him at some point? But now that he's with Adam Booth, potentially he will come down. But I do wonder about the fit with Booth. Is he really a Booth-style fighter? I mean, And is Booth going to be able to do anything for Joe Joyce's defense, which is often actually something that is pointed out as a bit of a gaping flaw, that, you know, he can be hit. And we saw that in the Stavern fight. Stavern was catching him with, you know, wild haymakers. Obviously, it didn't do too much to Joyce, and ultimately Joyce overcame Stavern and just completely battered him into submission. It is a bit of a concern because he seems to be, from what most of us are seeing, relatively wide open. And that chin, if he's getting hit by the elite punches, you know, who knows what will happen. He has been knocked out before in the amateurs, but I guess, you know, that's a bit of a different kettle of fish, and many sort of moons ago now. But I have to wonder, the Booth style, what can he do with them? But coming back to the UK after only, what, less than a year in the United States, based in the United States, I wonder, are we about to see a change in promoter for Joe Joyce? And I say that because this kind of has the breadcrumbs of something that happened in 2018. Obviously, David Haye and Richard Schaefer, in their Ringstar Haymaker promotional banner, they originally promoted Joe Joyce. But then after that mid-year, when Salas walked away, and it was sort of couched at the time that Salas was going into semi-retirement, and that's, you know, why he was sort of leaving the scene. But since I've seen Salas in all manner of places around the world, training and supporting his fighters, being in the corner, it didn't make me wonder, well, how much of that was really true. Maybe he had stepped back to some extent, but he was all in with Joyce, and then all of a sudden he was off the scene, and a month later he replaced by Sanchez, and then he signs with Al Heyman, the advisor. And maybe some of what's happening is, are they actually going to make a different move here? Is this going to be something where he's going to jump ship to someone else? Because at the time, David Haye, after Salas left, there was a bit of a question, well, what was happening? What was Haye's involvement, especially after Heyman was on the scene? And it was only confirmed, it was about 3 or 4 months later, that David Haye was no longer part of Joe Joyce's setup, and that was probably something to do with, you know, his contract had to actually run out, that they had to wait until whatever the date had to be reached, and then he could say something. And it was pretty lickety split that any trace of Joe Joyce was erased from David Haye's various websites, all that sort of stuff. So it makes me wonder, coming back to the UK now, I guess two things. Is he actually going to jump ship to someone else? And that may mean signing on with another promoter. So you could be looking at Eddy Hearn or potentially Frank Warren. Those are the kind of two big fish within the UK. There are other promoters, but who else can get him the sort of fights that he would want to be in now? And that's the big question, because in America, for his first few fights, he didn't have a massive amount of success getting the sort of fights he may want to be in, and then fed an over-the-hill and faded Berman Stavern in a fight that he was expected to win pretty handily, and ultimately wasn't really troubled, clipped a few times, but he, you know, took care of that one handily enough. So the other possibility, though, is potentially they're going to base him, because PBC does have this new deal with ITV. Maybe he's going to be part of the centerpiece for the cards going forward there. So that is one possibility. But given he's now relocating after, you know, much fanfare, it must be said, to some extent, they were talking about him campaigning in the United States, training under Abel Sanchez. But then less than a year later, he's gone, coming back to the UK. Makes me wonder if that's, you know, so I'm not sort of saying anything was wrong with Sanchez, but obviously with the age that he's at, 33, they want something to happen and happen now. And they've already bailed on a guy like David Haye before. So what's to say that he's not going to bail on Richard Schaefer? He doesn't have to be with a promoter that is connected to PBC. We've seen other fighters who are advised by Al Heyman go other directions. You know, there's one or two that are working with, you know, Frank Warren and Eddy Hearn over the years. So it does happen. Obviously, probably Al Heyman would rather keep people within his tent. To a large extent, he does, and rather successfully. But there could be a potential move for Joe Joyce to go somewhere else. Maybe he is actually getting different offers from the likes of Eddy Hearn and Frank Warren. I'm sure they'll be sniffing around to sort of see, well, Joe Joyce, you know, we could market this guy. He's relatively popular. He's a growing force within the heavyweight division. And Frank Warren is saying, look, I want to set up this fight between Daniel Dubois and Joe Joyce. So if he was to join with a Frank Warren, then that all of a sudden becomes much more of a possibility. And there could be options within the Matchroom stable to get Joyce to fight the likes in a fight or two, potentially with Dillian Whyte, Derek Chisora, and maybe even down the line Anthony Joshua. and being with the likes of an Eddie Hearn or Frank Warren, they can use their connections to try peddle some influence to get him into some fights. And I'm not saying that he can't get that with PBC, but at the moment with the logjam for a heavyweight title shot at Deontay Wilder, he's going to be facing Brazil. And the sort of pipeline, to some extent, looks like, Adam Kovnatsky, Luis Ortiz, Tyson Fury, potentially the rematch. So there is a bit of a clogged sort of system there with the heavyweights within the PBC stable. So it's hard to see him getting a shot at Deontay Wilder anytime soon. And the sort of heir apparent in the PBC stable isn't Joe Joyce, it's more F.A. Ajagba. He seems to be the guy that they're starting to groom to be the next big thing within the PBC stable. But he's much younger than Joyce, so they can take their time with him. Obviously, Joyce and his manager, Sam Jones, they want everything to happen yesterday because, the longer it goes, the more of Joyce's prime fades away. So maybe this change to a new trainer is going to herald something different. Either it's an extended sort of deal, fighting as one of the headliners on ITV on a consistent basis, or maybe he's going to jump ship in a couple of months to a new promoter. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if that happens, because we've seen it happen before. He dumped Haye and he went off to America under Richard Schaefer, just Schaefer. It wasn't under that co-promotional outfit that Schaefer had with Haye. It was under the Ringstar banner. So don't be surprised if Joyce actually makes a move for the sake of his career, and it might sort of seem to come out of left field, but it'll make complete sense. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.